Hi folks, I'm Andy Wright. I'm the VP of Solutions at Fieldglass. Welcome to the presentation. Sorry we had a few minutes of AV stuff we had to take care of. I'd like to start off with just a question. How many folks here are familiar with Fieldglass as an application? Great, so I can go a little higher level than I thought I was going to. Excellent, wonderful. So what we're going to do is speak a little bit about Fieldglass and about the different approaches that we've identified for integration with the Ariba platform. And so there are two main modes and some different opportunities around getting some of the integrations in place. And then we're also going to have a demo of the application, just a little walkthrough of what it does and how it can be configured or how it can be leveraged. And then we'll do plenty of time for questions and answers. So there'll be a couple of logical points, and I'm happy to stop at the end of each slide or area here and answer any questions as we go. We've got plenty of time, but sometimes it's easier to do it that way. Okay? Great. So getting started, Fieldglass is with Ariba part of the business network. And so Fieldglass, Ariba, and Concur make up the business network. And the logical grouping there is we each, as an application, have our own network of suppliers. And as we continue to provide services, we'll look for ways to continue to leverage that across the base. More enablement of suppliers, easier interaction with suppliers across the applications, more consistency in that regard. The applications themselves kind of focus on different things, and we do it differently. So while there will be a convergence of the look and feel around the applications, can't say I have any visibility into the roadmap as to what they'll look like 5 years from now or anything like that. The example that I like to use is Microsoft Office Suite. Everybody's familiar with it. Nobody would think of doing a PowerPoint in Excel, but they're very comfortable working in Excel and PowerPoint. Different applications, they do different things, but the navigation, the look and feel is the same. And so folks are equally comfortable in all of those applications. And that's really the approach we're taking here from that perspective. And we'll look to also from the supplier side, find opportunities to continue to provide that benefit to them. So that's the general approach from that perspective.
Very good, because we didn't have the right presentation. Right, so now we had the right presentation, but we didn't have internet.
So a little bit about Fieldglass. We are 15 years old. We have over 300 customers. And the key thing there is not the size of the customers, but the breadth of the data it gives us for benchmarking and leveraging across our customer base. All of our customers share their data, not from a personal identifiable perspective, but from a benchmarking perspective, so that they have the same benefit of other customers, access to that 25 billion in spend around basically what are the trends, what are the opportunities around the different categories of services procurement, where do I fit into that? And again, it's not a one-to-one match. Everybody here knows that we are unique companies. It's more of knowing where you fit into a particular market from a benchmarking perspective. Are you in the top 10%? Are you in the bottom 50%? And how does that balance against the benchmarking? So it gives you good guidelines from that perspective. It's a way to see additional trending in the application. And for most of our customers, that's very important. That's the forward look that they're hoping to get from the process. We're a global application. We're in over 100 countries, and the app is translating to 18 languages. And that translation is on all sides, supplier, worker, and buyer. And that's really the important part. Most of our customers have a common language they do business in, but their suppliers are global. And that's really where the benefit comes in, because the supply base themselves can run the app in their language. And so when they're doing recruiting and sourcing, they get that opportunity with their folks, and that's really where the power comes in. We're the industry leader in the space, and I'll talk a little bit about that later and what that means. But most importantly on this slide, I would say, is the culture of partnership. So again, we have a strong approach to our customers of solving their business problems. That's really what we look to do. Over half of our roadmap on any single release is driven by our customers. And we do three releases a year, 3 major releases, once every 4 months. And so they really have a great amount of input into our roadmap. For example, right now, this particular week, we're doing our best practice summit, our customer summit in the US. And so within that, as a takeaway from that, the customers there will be meeting and presenting back to us on what they think the important items are we should be looking at over the next couple of releases. And it's by solving the business problems that the application has continued to evolve. And what we found really uniquely is across our customer base, You're all looking to solve the same problems. The uniqueness is how you as a company approach that, and the nuances in your footprint of systems and the way that you approach the businesses. But the same problems exist across all of our customers, for the most part. And so the best practice capabilities really stands out there. Any questions on that before I move on? Nope, great. And I believe these slides are in the application. If you download the app, they're attached to these as a presentation, and folks can have access to them. So a little bit about the Forrester Wave report. So every 4 years, Forrester comes out with a series of reports in the different categories that they oversee, and the VMS space is the one they did in 2014. And they looked at all the major players, and you see them all up in here, and they rate the individual applications against that matrix of both available functionality as well as are they suited for purpose globally, and then on the last piece that we actually take the most pride in, ability to generate ROI to our customers. And again, from our customer base, they have self-reported that we generate high levels of ROI for them quickly in using the application. And at the end of the day, that's really one of the key things that comes out of it. The driver there has to be because our application itself allows for vendor funding as well as customer subscription. And so if you're leveraging a vendor-funded model, as folks that use the application may know, you drive ROI very quickly. And you can always find new opportunities to drive ROI. And so that's really the functionality piece, and the capabilities are the strength of the application, but I really think the ROI is where our customers continually drive value, and therefore our growth has been based on that, our ability to do that for our customers and continue doing that for our customers. So a little bit about the business problems we're looking to solve. Across most of our customers, they use a significant portion of their workforce as external labor. On average, it's between 30 to 50%. There are some customers that have much higher percentages of that. There are certain spaces, oil and gas extraction, some of the more remote heavy industries, where they actually are leveraging higher than 50%. But again, due to the remote locations, the need for expertise, the changing out of it, it drives a different model. And as such, when you have that percentage of your workforce that is external, the need to have visibility to that becomes critical. And honestly, whether it's 20% or 50%, the needs are the same, but when you have those higher numbers, the ability to have it in real time becomes the key driver. And it's not only where are my dollars being spent, but it's also a chain of custody question. What are the various people in my organization doing? Who it is that's doing that? What systems do they have access to? What projects are they on? What budgets do they roll up to? And as you look to spend and manage that spend on a real-time basis, having that data on a real-time basis now allows you to work constructively. For example, I'm sure everybody in this room has dealt with the third quarter exercise of looking backwards at your budget and spend rate and then saying, we've got to make an adjustment, we have to cut by 10% or 15%. And it's a point in time reflex. Yet, then the horse trading starts. Well, my project's only about 30 days from completion. If we cut back now, we're gonna lose a lot of our velocity initiative, or this is a critical component, we have to deliver by the end of the year. And when you now go back in fourth quarter and look, you got 7% of your savings. And so having a real-time visibility in the application and forward visibility on the projects now allows you to manage the budgets a lot more carefully, a lot more effectively, but also now make those adjustments and see that you've got the 10% if you need to make it as an adjustment going forward, because our customers have visibility to all that data. And they can then make the decisions and enact those decisions. And so it's critical from a go-forward perspective. Most of our customers have it on the full-time side. You know where your folks are working. You can make those adjustments, but it's very hard on the contingent side, especially when you outsource and you don't know how many folks necessarily are part of that outsource agreement and where they are. Any questions about that? And if I'm going too fast, let me know. I have an East Coast, New York way of speaking, so I tend to clip right through these things. Another way of looking at it, though, is from a headcount visibility perspective, external workers are very mobile. Not only do they touch almost anything within your organizational footprint, but what we've seen over these last 15 years is they move between the categories very quickly. You'll have full-time employees that leave the company and become consultants. And if you have a break in service, they're back after the break in service, and if you don't, they're back next week. And they're doing maybe very much the same work they were doing before. But now you've got to see them and treat them and track them as a very different category of worker. More importantly, we see folks within these large outsourcing and project agreements where it's a mix of what we would call traditional contingent labor, time and material staff, AUG type workers, and truly outsourced service workers. Folks, you as a customer supervise, and groups that you don't want to supervise. And they move between it, and when they move between it, their rates change, because the agreements are very different. Yet really, if a person moves between it within a course of 6 months, should you pay a difference in the rate? Did they really come back with all these new skills that they didn't have 6 months ago when you had them on the contingent agreement? And again, a lot of these players work in both spaces, not to call any of them out, but they function in different areas doing different things, but they tap the same pools of talent. And so the ability to track that, and our application uniquely gives folks the ability to do it, and to track it from an employee to the other categories perspective, now gives us customers the strong capabilities to manage those pools effectively, to move the levers. So looking backwards, it's a cost management, access management problem. But looking forwards, it's a work planning, work placement opportunity. Given my mix and matrix of folks, where do I want my work to be done? If anybody's familiar with the car industry, they actually have the plants bid for work. So when they're going to create a new car line and place it, plants actually make proposals on who could do it based on their capabilities and their costs. And so I'm sure everybody in the room has a series of talent strategies for their company where they look at offshoring and nearshoring and what are the new emerging markets with talent you can go to, and how do you balance that effectively to get the maximum ROI on the dollars you're spending. And so all of that visibility becomes really part and parcel to that unique problem Fieldglass is here to help solve for. On top of it, the strong procurement capabilities such that Ariba has as well, so that you have all of that. That's the simple message. That stuff just happens. It gets done because it's configured, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's the problem up front that you're now free to spend your time on solving from a customer perspective and a higher value opportunity. Any questions there? Thoughts, comments? Great. So as we started the discussion around how this integration with the Ariba platform should look, there was an ongoing dialogue around how should our customers look to kind of split up this work. What should be done in Fieldglass? What should be done in Ariba? What are the logical patterns? And every customer is a little different, and they've looked to us, say, hey, you're all SAP. Bring us the answer. Let us help and understand it. And at the time we started this, we had good ideas, but we do have significant amounts of functionality that overlap. And again, up until the acquisition, we were separate applications competitors, and we had to do that kind of stuff. So we worked on identifying what these trends are and give this guidance back to our customer base. And there's a number of things that get into it. It's really more of a decision tree that each customer looks at. One is there are buying patterns. Your hiring managers, your managers in a particular category, tend to operate in a consistent manner. If they're working on managing resources, external resources, they're also not as likely to be doing hard goods, direct goods purchasing. It's not 100%, but it tends to be patterns. They're working with people and teams, and they're groups that will centralize the ordering on the other side. So we found that there's some common buying patterns, and people can then operate in one application comfortably. From an approval perspective, customers tend to have a policy and practice, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. But as we now drill into categories, we find that the way customers procure those categories are also a little more consistent. And so when you get to things like project-based services or business consulting, there's some focus points that really help us understand which way it should go. There isn't necessarily as much sourcing going on. These are preferred vendors. You know who you're going to use. You may already have agreements in place with them. You may want to bounce it off a couple of different vendors to see who might give you the best mix of a fixed price approach within the contract. But with many of our customers, they don't do that. They'll go with their known vendor for that category, they've got an agreement, they're part of your partnership, you bought bulk hours, and now you just need to work with them collaboratively to identify how many hours this project should take from the bank that you purchased for that year. Or you need to now put it as part of a larger project, but you need the upfront budget controls, the upfront encumbrance against the project budget, all those kind of things. So that leads it into one avenue. Or it's truly an ad hoc service. You don't know how much you're going to use in this year, but you do know the rates that the vendor would charge you when you do it, and so you'll just draw down as need. And each of those lead into a different category. Is it fieldglass from a procurement perspective? Is it Ariba under ACC for contract compliance? What's the easiest approach, and how does that fit into the buying patterns for the people that are managing that category? And that's the exercise we go through across these different things with our customers to help find that right balance for them on using the tools that they have. And it falls into patterns, but everybody's different. Or everybody wants to be different. Maybe that's another way of thinking about it too. Last thing, just as it stands out, we're seeing a great emergence in rebillable services. And again, fieldglass has some deep capabilities there. That's a completely different approach, because we hear from our customers, well, as long as it's within the price my customer's paying, I don't care what it costs. Because I'm here to deliver a service to my customer, and that's the primary point here, making that service work. So from then, it's not really a budget question. It's more, can I manage that spread effectively? There are ways that I can do it to drive a little more value to me while not reducing my cycle time, while not reducing my opportunity to service my customers. Again, some different opportunities. I talked about this a little bit in the beginning, where I mentioned that the bulk of our releases are customer-driven. Over the last several years, we've focused about 30% of the overall fees on the services procurement market, especially in these SOW project outsource capabilities. Most of our customers go after the staff aug, the we call contingent space first, and then go after the SOW and project-based. We refer to it as, the reason being, it's easy to manage the people you can see. Especially if you have an MSP. Are folks familiar with the managed service provider? An outsourced group, a Randstad, a Manpower, groups like that will manage your program for you, and they'll pay all the vendors and you just pay them. So that's very easy when you get your arms around, and because of that, it's pretty common in the space. About 70% of our customers manage their programs through an MSP for the contingent space. But on the project space, they tend to do that in-house. And again, for the nuances. And within that, what we see is, we refer to it as squeezing the balloon. So you have a really good program from a compliance perspective. You've got your arms around the contingent worker very well, especially over here in EMEA, where if you don't manage that carefully, you inherit an employee, and that may not have been your plan. And so when you have a very good program like that, all of a sudden, suppliers will be very helpful to managers who are looking to wrap things up in an SOW, because it's easier. And now you're getting contingent wrapped up in an SOW, and if, depending on your organization, most organizations exclude SOW project work from your headcount tracking. And so if you have a headcount freeze, it's also a good way to get the work done without violating the HR headcount requirement. Yet from a spend management perspective, it's going into one of the more opaque areas of your organization. And so that's where our customers will quickly come along after they've gotten their handle on the contingent program and now implement the SOW in the services procurement, because they need to stop that leakage. And once I squoze the balloon here, it's ballooned up here, and now I need to rein that in as well. Again, for all the reasons we spoke about earlier. Any questions around that? Yes?
So one question that comes to my mind is, we already have implemented Ariba procurement solution. So what I see is, like IT services, we already have contingent workers whose money is in a legacy system. So if you want to tie the two things together, is there a demo that is planned for today's session, like from the start of CW, hiring, sourcing, and how we are raising PO, and then how it's going to get signed?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yep, we will cover that, but that's the part you guys came for once we explain what we do. You're exactly right, yes.
Thanks.
No worries. But these are the categories today that our customers are managing through the fieldglass application from a services procurement perspective. And it's continuing to grow as we get into this analysis with customers and how that balance between us and Ariba from a platform should look for that customer to derive the maximum benefit from their buying patterns. Okay. A little bit about the roadmap. I didn't realize that slide got changed. Okay. So this year, we deployed two integration processes with the Ariba platform. The first is with P2P, and it's an end-to-end integration, and I'll go through it here in a slide or two. And so that's the full services procurement through PO automation with the Ariba platform. It's out of the box. Customers don't have to do anything to use it. They don't have to put any resources towards towards developing it. It is a configuration capability within the platforms. There's some work in setting it up, but it is nothing that has to be done from a development perspective. The second is what we refer to as Ariba Network Standalone, where for our customers, we actually just have an integration at the Ariba network. And so they may not be using P2P, or they may be using P2P under a model where they also have direct POs going to the network for categories, and now fieldglass can go direct to the network. And so the benefit there is a common integration pipe back to the ERP, but multiple channels for providing a single view to POs across the vendor base through the AN. So kind of that first look at the true business network capabilities from that perspective. First generation of that between us. Second thing we put in place this year was a light UI harmonization. So all of us are moving towards the Fiori principles for look and feel, and so you'll see the application. For those familiar with the new Ariba interface, you'll see that they look a lot more similar. The menus operate the same way. Again, that Microsoft analogy I used earlier, that folks have a comfortable ability to kind of move around through it, and that'll continue to evolve over time. We're not going to be the same application anytime soon, but again, what we can do to make it common and comfortable and easy for folks to navigate SSO between them, so that folks can just click out of one into the other, don't need to do anything. All those things were put in as part of this year's activities. The final piece we'll talk about here is the out-of-the-box master data, and so we'll talk about the Ariba Cloud Integration Adapter that's available, CI5, for folks that are familiar with it. And within that, we've added the fieldglass master data drivers as a package there. And so if you've got it, you can add those very easily. And if you don't have it, like I say, let's rush out and get it, because I think it's probably one of the nicer things that our customers will leverage over the next year or so, because it really gives a platform for a single pipe. These aggregation type of tools, personally, I think are the future of where our customers are going to expect to go with us. If you can create a platform that all your integrations can go through and get managed easily, and if the drivers for 9 out of 10 of the things you're looking for are there, the ability to get velocity on these projects really steps up tremendously. Okay? Yep.
Any integration plan between fieldglass and SAP on Azure?
So yes, we have 25 or 30 customers today that have integrations with SRM, with invoicing, with the master data, but prior to the acquisition, they were done point to point. And so one of the things we're looking at is now that same approach. How do we bring that into a package that we can now drop and deploy for customers? And then as that continues to evolve, turn it into a true out-of-the-box offering that now can be deployed from any customer anywhere. So I would say, again, you'll see that tail end of this year, beginning of next year, coming together as available offerings for customers to take advantage of. And within that, it's how much of a tweaking we'll need to do. People, some of the things are all the same. Folks use cost objects, WBS elements, IO codes, network codes. Those are consistent. But when you get to things like organizational structure, some use purchasing orgs, some use part of the financial hierarchy off of the cost objects. Those nuances are what we want to get into those packages correctly so people can do an A or B and not have to wait and do a change from that perspective. There'll be 3 flavors that we'll commonly see in the, across the footprint that we can leverage and start with. Yep. Yes.
Okay, I think one question you already answered for him. The second question is you just mentioned about out-of-the-box customization. So what if a client wants to kind of configure according to his or her needs of the company? So are you flexible enough at all, or do you have to just take it out of the box and then deal with it?
So no, we're flexible. Up until the acquisition a year and a few months ago, we we offer 150 APIs that a customer can leverage, both uploads and downloads out of the box. Has nothing to do with the SAP or Ariba integrated offerings, and they still exist. So customers may only leverage 3 of the drivers in the master data and choose to do one that they want to do uniquely because of their particular approach. But what we'd like to do is come up with a way to even provide still that support within that common pipe, because we think there's quite that opportunity to provide an accelerator platform that customers can now put all of their stuff to the cloud apps through, and the benefit that offers. So within each of the drivers, there'll be flexibility to add fields and maybe even easily point them at different places. But if you really need to do something completely different, you could always take our established APIs, which are very, very flexible and malleable, and do a point-to-point on top of the ones you didn't want to use. Yep. But we're just looking to, save work, effectively. So the back half of this year, what we're focusing on is we have a number of joint customers that are ASP customers that are looking to migrate off that. And so, again, as part of their plan, what's a simple transition for that? How would we be able to offer an out-of-the-box project plan for the way that would manage from a best practice perspective? And so, as we get a few customers going through it, that'll become the blueprint that others can follow. And all of the integrations I'm talking about today are also earmarked for Ariba buyer customers, the on-premise customers, and would be available out of the box for them as the same configuration approach. A little different, because obviously that's sitting behind your firewall, and a little higher level of customization that was done to those systems typically than what you see in the on-demand world, but still ensuring that the basic capabilities are there. And as we talk through the integrations here in a second, one of the key factors to note and think about here, as you see this integration, none of the existing fieldglass or Ariba functionality gets deprecated as part of this process. So for example, if you are pulling PO data out of on-demand and bringing it over into SAP or your backend, Oracle or PeopleSoft, and pushing back the PO number for use on that object, that still works under this integrated approach. None of that changes, as an example. And that was a core piece of this. No functionality gets deprecated as part of this. Okay? Any questions?
Is it, I'm not sure if it may be on the next slide or so, is there a drumbeat of these upgrades or things coming available?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Is there a certain drumbeat that you do it once every quarter, or is there?
Got it. So there is. So Fieldglass has 3 major releases a year. And that's where we target functionality like this. Whenever we deliver functionality that would create a functional change to our customers, we target it. We call it a major release. Ariba has a similar release schedule that they tie it to. It's not exactly the same as ours, but we're both the same in that we have published release schedules. And then you would look to mirror those up. So for example, these things we're about to talk about with the on-demand integration, we both targeted it towards our March releases. So it came out at the same time. That would be the common approach. We wouldn't put something in place and wait a couple of months for Ariba to do it or vice versa. They will be timed from that perspective. I'm not, off the top of my head, familiar with the Ariba schedule for the rest of this year. I believe there's a September one, and we have a July one and a November one, so it's a little overlap from that perspective. Mm-hmm. That's the network. Okay. So, the integration with P2P, and again, from an approach perspective, this is one of the reasons this was actually done relatively quick. We got acquired in May, this was delivered in March as a functional release between the platforms, is that we actually had a lot of experience doing this over the last 10 years with both our Ariba customers, but also our SRM customers or Ariba Procurement customers, because when you talk about that procurement, that purchase requisition to procurement process, it's similar. The workflow is similar. What you do around it is what's unique to a customer. And so the way that it would work is that it starts off with a request in Fieldglass, a sourcing request in Fieldglass. And so whether it's contingent or project work, the workflows operate the same way as far as the integration goes. And so once that engagement has been completed, once it's submitted on our application, it then automatically gets pushed over to Ariba P2P. It will raise the requisition automatically. It will fill in all of the required data, including the accounting block data. It supports multiple lines or single line. And once the requisition's been raised, it would automatically be submitted for approval. Route through the established approval process. Once it's converted to a PO, that PO is automatically returned to fieldglass. It posts back into the fieldglass object, and that's what allows us to release it to the vendor for them to begin their activities against it. Now, prior to that happening, if it's a contingent workflow, and you'll see it in the demo, there's a number of collaboration steps. They're submitting candidates, they're submitting resumes are being reviewed. If it's an SOW, there's often collaboration with the vendor. I've got a master agreement with my fees and rates in it. They're collaborating, telling me how big this work should be, maybe what the deliverables should be broken into. The manager now has to really negotiate those back, alter them and change them, and they ultimately agree what that SOW should look like. Then it goes out to create the purchase rec, because now at that point we know who, what, where, when, how long, how much. I can raise a full PO. Yes?
The one thing I don't understand is why you start at fieldglass, because we are telling our employees that they should start searching for the goods or for the needs. So instead of going into fieldglass, because you know you need to go into fieldglass services, you go into this Google LinkedIn where you actually search, and when you if it is a service you need, then you make a punch out perhaps, or into another application called fieldglass, fine, and then you fill out what you need, and then you take it back into your SRM or P2P solution if it's cloud-based.
That's supportable.
Okay.
But that would be the uniqueness of you having that front-end engine in place as a common intake point.
Yeah.
Not every customer has that
Okay.
capability, and so, but what the managers do know that I operate with these vendors for this way, and we can fill that gap.
But seen from our customers, internal customers, you could say, it would be nice to have only one place to go. The one you told about the Microsoft feel and look into the application, but also for their perspective going into, I have a need.
Right.
I don't care if it's called fieldglass or whatever, it's here I'm going.
I think at the end of the day, or I should say in the future, that will become an evolved offering. I had to venture a guess today, and it would strictly be a guess. Remember that safe harbor thing I put up in the beginning? It could be Fiori.
Yeah.
And a common Fiori intake that each customer can now set up and put the logic behind. But you're right, in your case, it could be, let me search, you have an external database that you're gonna search to get them the service of the vendor you want them to use. Or it could be as simple as, I need a service, or I'm hiring direct goods or indirect goods, and then it takes you to the right place to then begin that journey and that search. Because again, Ariba has capabilities to bring discovery on and things like that. Fieldglass has similar functionality within the service procurement. Every customer will find that balance point, and I think that's what we're looking
What
at.
is important for the customers is the need. They don't care if it is fieldglass or whatever.
As long as it gets the job done,
Exactly.
and it's easy to use.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so this kind of assumes they've already done that, they know what they need, and they start with, okay, let me define my ask now for this.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions?
Is the same, the fieldglass network is the same as Ariba network?
So no, we each have our own network, and it is different in what the capabilities are. So again, it's not judgmental, it just is. In the Ariba network, it's PO management, and they're flagged to be able to interact with the POs or not as probably the largest activity and function that folks do there. On the fieldglass side, it's a bit deeper, because the vendor has an upfront, a lot of activity around that sourcing request that's owned and controlled within the application. So submitting candidates or helping to collaborate on and define the SOW and managing the onboarding items that are required for any people brought onto those projects. And then it comes into the invoicing piece that we manage a little differently than the Ariba application does. We actually we call it invoicing on behalf of, but it's very similar to ERS, electronic receipt settlement. Since we know all the terms, and once you approve the deliverable, we help convert that into an invoice. Suppliers don't have to rekey everything, which they happen to like because it saves them a lot of work. and then they can pull the data into their system and create the AR on the back end. So different levels of functionality that we provide there within the network. But I think over time, what we're looking to do is create, and I have a slide at the very end on it, but enablement, easier enablement and view management across the networks to the vendors, so that their back office folks, their integrations work seamlessly, no matter where the work was placed or sourced.
Yeah, because I can imagine also towards the vendor, not only to the internal customer, but also to the vendor. You want to have one access point. If you need to tell them, hey, listen, you need to connect for the other activities, you need to connect to this network, and for the other activities to the Ariba network, you know. You need to set up, it's not only Azure, it's also costs maybe, because you maybe need to pay a fee as well for fieldglass network and also for the Ariba network.
So good point there. So, let me, in reverse order, there is only one fee for any transaction on the combined network. So a vendor doesn't get charged twice.
Okay.
If the PO originated in on-demand, then they pay the Ariba network fee for any activity against that PO. If the PO originated in fieldglass, the associated fieldglass fee covers it. They don't pay AN fees on those invoices. And that's built into the interface. There are flags there that ensure they don't get charged. So that's the first piece. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So the second is, I agree, vendors will want a common look, but again, even within the vendors, there are 2 different or 3 different constituencies that are using this. The folks up front here are the recruiters and the account managers, where the accounts payable and accounts receivable folks are on the back end, and so there may be people operating in different places, but to each one of them, there's one look and feel to what they're doing. Same with the hiring managers, and that's really what helps the efficiency kick in there.
But from IT perspective, then you still have the IT people need to connect and integrate the two networks.
Yeah, but again, I think you'll find we'll offer the tools out that they'll do it. And if the invoicing and such is coming through the AN, then really we can simplify that, because they tend to want the stuff out of the back. If they do need to do the front end stuff, as far as recruiting databases and tying those things up, that's a front end integration. And it's again, 2 different streams that don't cross. So it's easier to manage. Yes, sir.
So, actually 2 questions. One is related to the speed of integration. In the past, Ariba had some not too fast integrations with some of the systems which are no longer on the board. I don't want to get into those, but so do you really, you had a roadmap there for Q3, Q4, but it did not seem to be a full integration. So when do you expect a full integration with the Ariba network?
So for example, when I get through, we have a complete integration with the Ariba network today.
Yeah, but that means a physical access integration, I guess. It does not mean that the supplier don't need to sign up for 2 separate networks, right?
Got it, yep. So
it's like you have a physical integration when it gets to a point of like a ERP system integration or contractual management and stuff like that. It is 2 separate things, technically as well as contractual.
Got it, yep. So as part of, it's not a clear date on the roadmap yet, but one of the first things our customers have asked almost uniformly is, how do we make supplier enablement seamless between fieldglass and Ariba when I'm deploying both? The question there becomes, what's the order? Was fieldglass there first? Was Ariba P2P and the AN there first? Or are we actually being deployed concurrently? And so in that case, the answers are slightly different in each of those cases. But there are tools available that we're looking to kind of turn into more of a consistent product. And really what, for folks that are familiar with the Quadrum integration that Ariba handled, they put a lot of work into making ways to link those networks up seamlessly from suppliers. We're looking to leverage those things in a similar manner, so they would have one common agreement to sign, and then we would go ahead and manage the enablement as a consistent process for that.
So maybe taking a learning from that one instead of leveraging maybe a better approach overall for the fieldglass success. We are a Quadrant customer for about 5 years by now, so
Okay.
I can say that. But to me, the key to the success is the integration with the Ariba network, because Otherwise, you need to go and convince your suppliers to get on 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of networks, and it is increasing their complexity. It costs them a lot of money, and they may or may not want to do it. So this is, to me, this is a key success factor to speed up the integration, because one of the big things around Ariba that Ariba is acquiring these companies and solutions, and the integration, the roadmap is not 100% clear to the integration, to the full integration. It's almost like put a facade or a facade in front of it, and then you try to make things work in the back end. So I think that would be a critical success factor.
Yep, I think you're, I would say you're 100% correct from that perspective. And we've got a number of large customer engagements coming up that leverage the network, that will give us the opportunity to kind of road test that and knock the kinks out of it. But I think also I know from our perspective and using the fieldglass network, one of the challenges we see is getting the vendors to agree to a common account. So if you think about an example, Accenture, they have, in our system, many different accounts because their legal entity structure is different from, say, an Adecco or a Manpower, which could leverage a common account across most places. We have the ability to even, within a single account, give legal entity divisions, but they don't choose to use it, or the person we're dealing with there as the local rep doesn't understand that. So we have to get better at also figuring out how to get to the right people within the vendors to help them understand this opportunity for them. Otherwise, we just get local solutions, and it tends on, and not, so we can solve the local question, but then for a truly global company, they got 4 versions of that vendor out there, and I've just kicked the can down the road to another. So you're right, that is probably as important as anything else, because they are 1/3 of the discussion here.
Earlier you talked about, the gentleman up front mentioned how you can potentially initiate a request in P2P, or, well, actually not P2P, but a one-stop shop front end. So we're looking to do that using Ariba P2P. So when you mentioned that there's the ability of potentially punching out, is it the true punch-out capability that Ariba has with
Yep.
catalogs?
So that's supported. The challenge with the punch-out initially is that it didn't support accounting blocks. A punch-out assumes that when you bring the data back, you finish the shopping cart in P2P. And the problem there is when you look at a typical IT capability, if you've done the sourcing and the budgeting and things up front, and now you do the accounting block in the shopping cart, that doesn't come back in the PO data. And so now when you're transacting here, it's not linked. And so to that end, we've gotten the changes done to the P2P, to the punch-out capability that now supports accounting blocks. So yes, you could do that approach and bring it back. It's supported. It's not what we would consider the ideal approach, because now that's one part of the solution. Down here, managers now operating in fieldglass to do the actual receiving and transacting. So they're in 2 places anyway. You're creating this constant link where they're going into Ariba and jumping out the fieldglass and doing something and coming back. And so unless the person lives and dies in Ariba 8 hours a day, that doesn't necessarily make sense since it's easy to do it in fieldglass. And so we've seen the move from punch-out to back-end automated capabilities. But it's supported, and if there is one app that everybody lives in, then yes, that would be the ideal approach, and just pushes the data back out and comes in. Standard punch-out capability, catalog punch-out capability, is supported across the application, so it can be leveraged in any way you choose to do it. It's just the approach perspective. Yep.
54 swim lanes, right? So is there any plan in the roadmap to consolidate and unify it into 2 swim lanes? Because some of it to me looks like redundant. We can actually, like, though we are terming it differently, underlying functionality would be more or less the same. So is there any unification thoughts around, okay, how do we reduce this 4 lane into 2 lanes?
No, so not today. And part of the reason is Ariba P2P has customers fieldglass doesn't and will never. And fieldglass has customers that Ariba doesn't have or may never. So we're still 2 separate applications. And we need our networks for that. Down the road, if we ever become just one application, then yeah, that would naturally collapse. But that's not the roadmap, nor is it what we see in the near term, given that we're different cloud applications for different purposes.
From networking perspective, I would expect so, right, to combine it at one point.
More efficiency.
Possibly from a network perspective, but it's not as easy as that, because the applications function, the networks function separately, and the level of capabilities with them is different.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, but what we will do is look to make it literally as ubiquitous as possible to the user, to the supplier user, to the buyer user, so that the movement between it is almost invisible. Again, I go back to the Microsoft example. Nobody doubts that they're in PowerPoint or Excel or Word, but they don't mind it because they operate similarly enough that the people are like, yeah, I get it. Is there any place here where folks don't operate in at least 2 applications or 3 applications in the course of your week? Do you all operate in SAP or Ariba or PeopleSoft and never change? One ring to rule them all? Anybody have it? That's the challenge we face. It'd be a big Swiss Army knife. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, but it all has to come down to the connection, the opportunity that you have in fieldglass would be inside or even the way more vendors are connected and they're already there. You know.
Completely agree that anything we can do to make it more ubiquitous is the goal we're looking for. Streamline and make it easier is the long range focus there.
They gotta get different functionality. That makes sense.
Yeah, how we figure that out is, again, it could be the same. Big Fury may become the big front end wrapper that everybody goes in and out through. Who knows? But
And then the background's still split.
yeah, exactly. Simple from that perspective.
If you have a managed service provider, you don't have the necessity to have all the other suppliers on the fieldglass network as well.
So you don't, but most of our customers do. So you've touched on another point why fieldglass becomes this point up here. I remember I mentioned earlier that about 70% of fieldglass customers use a managed service provider in some avenue. Some actually use many. They're regionally based, one in the US or North America, one for EMEA, one for APAC. You don't want that MSP to have access to your Ariba network in order to manage those for the managers. It doesn't work that way. But it can work that way in fieldglass. We have the functionality that lets them act as a program administrator, but not have full buyer rights. And so our customers do one of 2 things. You set them up as a sole supplier, or they actually set up the suppliers underneath it so that I can see who my supplier base is from my chain of custody, my onboarding and other requirements, but the contract sits with the MSP. And they get a fee and it's managed as part of the invoice. And so in that case, you also have to have 3-party invoicing. So if you're in the UK and you've got that, and it's £100, the vendor's responsible for the £98 and the tax on that. The MSP's responsible for the £2, that's their program fee, and the tax on that. And the customer as a billing entity is the £100 worth of VAT. And that 3-party invoice has to be managed and ultimately sent through here. And we do that as part of our functionality, and that's, again, we wouldn't have to push that transactional maintenance onto the Ariba application because it's just the MSP that's part of that. So those nuances are an important part of why the applications function separately, or the question earlier about why you do it here versus there from that perspective, or even the punch-out affects that from that. Those are all just nuances of the customer's structure to drive to it. But you could do it the other way too.
One other question, changes.
Revisions are natively supported, yep.
Okay, so, but that will be triggered then by the change in Ariba, and that would update, or will the update come?
You would change it in fieldglass, and then it would push to a change order in Ariba, and come back with the PO number telling us it's been approved.
Okay.
Yep, so the changes are done in the source system, just like it was done in Ariba, we done there. Hold on, there was a question over here.
Yeah, what I understand, the last box here in the Ariba network, and so we replicate from Ariba P2P, a PO into Ariba network, to replicate those in the ECC or in another solution, because at the end we need to replicate in our ECC or ERP system.
That works.
And that is
Yep.
integrate with the ECC, right?
Anything, Ariba functionality above and beyond that hangs off this still exists. I'm only showing the fieldglass interaction with it, but yes, once this here, PO's been approved and completed, any procedures that sit off that to create it in the ERP,
Backend.
and to even bring that number back and pass it along, that's supported as part of the process. We don't deprecate anything, it still works the same way. Same thing when we get to the AN only.
And the second question is about service entry. When we do the service entry of a service in 2 steps, when we do the replica into Ariba P2P, is the same structure of data between Ariba P2P and fieldglass? Because for example, hierarchies, service hierarchies. Do we have those service hierarchies in Ariba P2P?
I can't speak for Ariba P2P. In fieldglass, yes, you actually have those service hierarchies. And when we get to the demo, we can show kind of how that categorization and stuff can pan out. But every customer's going to configure that a little differently.
The time sheets,
Sorry.
I was just, you know, we've only got 15 minutes left, but what we were gonna get for the demo, is the demo gonna show intricacies with respect to fixed fee versus T&M, multiple contractors, multiple rates, expenses, all that kind of stuff?
Yep. Can. So it's funny, we sat there and goes, I don't have 15 minutes, how are we gonna get through all this? Here we are. Let me pick up a tad of speed then so that we can jump through this a little bit more. This is the AN only capabilities. So from that perspective, same process you saw on the first, except no PO integration with P2P. Done in fieldglass. Fieldglass has the same capabilities. What essentially we're now doing is we would push a copy of that, we call it a work order or an SOW, up to the AN, it becomes the PO there. And then once all of the receipting is done, whether it's a service entry sheet or a time sheet or a fee approval or a fixed price activity approval, it creates the invoice, and that invoice gets pushed up and matched to the PO, and then it would be pushed onto the ERP from that. Or if you're using Invoice Pro or any other tool, it would be pushed into it the way it does today. Again, no deprecation of that functionality from that perspective. All the AN functionality remains as it is today.
Question about the receiving. So the receipt done in fieldglass will be imported into P2P and then exported to ERP, or how will that work?
So if we're doing P2P, yes. So I didn't get through the end of it, but in P2P, when this approval's done and that receipt is completed and approved, it gets pushed over to the AN, matched against the P2P PO that was placed there, routed up against into P2P, and now be receipted against that PO, and it comes out in the OK to pay file, or whatever your process is from P2P there. So there's no change to how that receipting and the matching functionality goes from that.
The actual receipt will be a copy imported into P2P and then exported, receipt export to ERP.
Same way as if a vendor had posted an invoice against the PO in the AN and it comes back into P2P. That same functionality is the path we take. It's just that the PO is managed from fieldglass and fieldglass is putting that through. So again, just like I mentioned, no fees, no double fees. When a PO is put on the network, it carries a flag. Did it come from P2P? Can the supplier interact with it? Or did it come from fieldglass or a legacy upload and the supplier cannot interact with it? So all those controls are in place the same way. Again, we just leveraged the functionality that's there. We just automated the creation around it so that it doesn't have to be done. Okay. I'm going to jump over this. We'll get.
They can come to our booth as well. We can show more functionality.
Why don't we do a brief demo now, and then if we have time, we'll do the CI after that for any questions around it, okay? Why don't we do that?
Okay, in our 13 minutes remaining, we're going to show some elements of the application. Hopefully our Wi-Fi will bear with me today. I'm actually tethering on my hotspot. I don't know about you, but the public Wi-Fi here is being strained with all the participants at Ariba Live. So bear with me here, just a moment. We also have a stand out on the floor as well. So if there's additional features or details that you want to discuss further, we can certainly spend some time with you there as well. And I'm actually in the wrong browser. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. I think. Okay. Oh shoot, this page I think closed on me. Sorry. All right, so I'm just going to quickly log in.
Didn't show up on the screen for a second.
Oh, sorry. Here we go. All right. Let's try this again. Lucky you.
Is this a standalone application demo? Okay.
Okay, so each individual who logs into our application is associated to a user role and some of the master data elements, obviously coming typically from your various ERP products. And as Andy mentioned, we have a CI adapter to help pull that data into the system so that it's not a duplication of effort. Those individuals can then transact against various different sourcing types, whether it's a service or project or an individual external resource that they're looking to fulfill. The system then has configuration set up against various different roles or service packages, projects and classifications associated to all of those suppliers that can receive these requests. So from a creation perspective, the manager can search for various different titles, skills, roles to initiate that particular request. From here, we can scroll down the page and see that a lot of the information is going to pre-populate for them or allow them to pull in data elements. Again, these master data elements would be sitting within the fieldglass application, but most likely being fed in either via Ariba or your SAP ERP product. And then from here, this transaction allows you to go ahead and submit after you've input some of the key data elements that you see on the page here, which then goes out either for approval or over to the various different suppliers for them to start sourcing. So this is essentially where that fieldglass network of suppliers will be receiving requests. They'll have a notification that they receive, and then they log into the fieldglass portal to begin responding to either an individual request or a service or project. So the details that you see here on the page, again, are just an overview of the requests that we've created. From here, we capture a list of all the different activities that are happening in the system. And ultimately, the first touch point in the P2P process from an integration perspective is typically once you've identified either the person that you're wanting to move forward with on the assignment or the milestones, deliverables, and activities associated to the service or project. So once I select the individual that I'm wanting to hire in our system, we create an assignment with the details around when they're starting, how long they're going to be on the assignment, if there's time capture, also from an accounting perspective, how much are they costing us, either on an hourly, daily, monthly rate perspective? Are there any additional costs associated to this resource? And as a result, how much are we committing to spend on this particular individual? This information is actually then sent over into Ariba to initiate the purchase requisition. I actually do have some workflow that I can show here. So if you're familiar with Ariba, in the past, you probably had to log out of whatever other sourcing system you had, log into Ariba, raise your purchase request. This information is now going to be automatically sent into the Ariba system and pull in some of these key data elements that you've seen on the page here that are actually aligned to the assignment that's being created. So for example, the job title, the start date, the end date, the individual who's raising this request. So that's now automated as a part of this process.
What if you have an SRM solution instead of and only using APC?
Sure, good question. So today we obviously still support those integrations, but at this point in time it's not a standard out of the box offering.
I would say by early 2016 there will be similar opportunities there. But since this is Ariba Live, talk about Ariba.
Yes.
How does it actually work if you have contracts with suppliers, like Atos, for instance, and you're hiring people?
Sure.
How is that connected?
So within, again, 2016 has a roadmap item for Ariba contracts to fieldglass as a seamless integration. So that once you've raised that master agreement, you could post it in, and Jamie will move over to the SOW piece where, I mean, here you would see it on the rate card, that rate card for contingent labor setup. But on the project side, we see it's a lot more variable and it happens a lot faster. There's new contracts every day. It could be for a whole piece of work, or it could be for project management resources for the next 2 years. And every SOW has to hang off that. And so the feed of that data, that think of it as another type of master data. It's your contract master data, is a 2016 roadmap item. The challenge we have there is just making sure we've got a good FRD doc that's broad enough to handle all the nuances that are going to be looking for across the categories.
Yes, go ahead.
Also offer, like a match evaluation of your database, like Ariba do with the suppliers. So how many suppliers are on Ariba network? Do you also have something like what criteria does the client, the customer need? So if you find in your database or like in the fieldglass network.
So, like a supplier search?
Yeah. And if I apply and I don't find something.
Yes. So we do. We have a similar piece there, but that's another question around what will the ultimate business network vehicle take? Will we look at Ariba Discovery for that, so that it's a common approach for doing it? Will customers want to continue doing it differently? Because what we find in our experience is that with our customers, especially when they get into service vendors, they also have to be approved at a local level. Just because you have a master contract doesn't mean from an HSE perspective you can work at this particular site, especially in the heavier intensive industries, oil and gas, extraction, those kind of things. So there could be other steps that go in there, whether that's part of the Ariba SIPM or whether we pick up some of that. We're still trying to figure out what the best approach. Again, the common thing is what's the easiest thing for the vendors to get it done.
So from an approval perspective, we can support obviously approvals either in the fieldglass system or if they need to still occur as configured in the Ariba process, those approvals can still be leveraged. And once the approval is complete, let's say in this case, the approvals are occurring on the purchase requisition in Ariba, that data will then loop back onto the fieldglass assignment that you saw us creating here and populate the work order within this document. So again, now creating a one-to-one match between the original assignment that was raised here and associated to that committed spend. So as this person now comes on to the assignment, maybe they're submitting expenses, milestones, time, that information that's approved is then posted back to that line item on your purchase order to draw down the spend consecutively. Yes?
Another question, mobility, is that also on your roadmap as well? You're talking about approval flows, so I can imagine that it would be nice to have them also on mobile app.
So yes, the fieldglass application supports a mobile app for approvals. The web browser, the mobile browser is also done. A lot of our customers use the iPad. It's all HTML5 to work within the iPad. But I think also a lot of other opportunities given the other mobile options SAP offers. We have some customers that are exploring a universal work list approval through Fiori as an opportunity there. We support UWL with customers today and feed the data out to them. So definitely, especially on the executive approvals, they're not dialing into the app. There's email approvals or web app approvals that they're using for it.
So from a services side or project management, we have the ability to also obviously set up all of the various different details associated to a project or service. And then more importantly, give a breakdown of the different deliverables that we're expecting, whether they're fixed priced items, events, maybe a scheduled ongoing payment that you have with your supplier. It could also be associated to certain fees, for example. So in this case, we can see various different line items here that are tied to a due date and a cost. These objects here can also be obviously then associated to the purchase requisition and purchase order process, whether it's one individual PO for the entire project or service that's being set up for this particular activity, or an individual PO per line item, just depending on your business needs. In addition to the deliverables that you see here, in many cases, as Andy indicated, the customer is also wanting some better visibility around the people who are providing this service, regardless if it's fully outsourced or maybe actually if you have these individuals in your facilities. And this becomes quite a powerful component for you to now start and manage both the service and the resources around it to determine, are you getting the best service possible? Are you paying more for these types of resources or an outsourced service as if you were to bring it in-house, for example? So now I'm showing you a list here of all the individuals that are actually providing the IT support. They're offshore in a Pune service center, but I can go into their individual record and also manage that person from their profile in the application as well. This becomes quite powerful from an analytics perspective. We can then start to provide you various different reports and give you some benchmarking information and trends around what's happening between both the services going through the system and then also the external resources. So with that, in 2 minutes time, I'm not really sure what else we want to cover from a product perspective, but if there's any other questions in the room, we can certainly take them now.
When the invoices are coming in and the supplier
Mhm.
recognizes that the rate has changed, can they just, did something in the tool notify us that, we should change the rate? I assume they can't change.
For
Moving from offshore to onshore, increase in tenure, anything that rate might need to increase.
Sure. So in general, we align various different rates to either the line item that you saw or the individual resource. And for example, from a timesheet perspective, timesheets that come into the application will be associated to those data objects on that assignment. If there's a change to an individual resource, there's a revision that's made to their assignment to allow for that adjustment.
So let me make an addition to that, because if within the master service agreement, there's a rate card by location, when you assign a person to that location, the rate will automatically populate regardless of where they are. And so we've even got a couple that have onshore, offshore. He's 90% offshore, but he comes onshore for 2 months a year, and it tracks that rate difference. Also here with AWR and worker pay parity, there is a number of rate schedules that now have time-based. Once you've run the job for 400 hours, your rate changes. That actually gets built into the assignment and calculated, and then it changes per that schedule, and the supplier sees it on their side as part of the rate schedule, so they don't have that question. They know where the flip over occurs. And again, that's the strength of the application, that we manage that up front, but to the integration with Ariba to the PO, it's invisible. It's part of the process. Nothing else had to be done. Whether we break it out by lines or whether it's just a single line, in that case that they manage to the total dollars, all the controls and all the details are in fieldglass from a frontline management.
So if you negotiate a rate reduction in an MSA after 12 months, let's say,
Right.
you put that in here, it automatically happens.
Correct. Or they do a 12-month assignment, and when they revise it for another period, it'll automatically take that into account, drop it down the revision, and send it through. Yep.
We can show you some further examples of, I guess, any of these items. Again, we have a demo area on the
I think
next
these last couple
floor.
of questions are a good way to explain. There are a lot of nuances in how that stuff works, and that's why the applications are separate. I don't mean it's not a defense thing, but we build a lot of complexity in the front end of services procurement that, I mean, had we remained separate companies, Ariba would have been building it for ASP. That's exactly the approach that they were on in that case, but that's why they're separate for separate purposes.
What's the benchmarking data that you can show? So you can just go in and see what others are generally paying by skill sets and rates?
To an extent,
Yes,
we
yeah.
manage that a little more closely than that. We'll provide it to you as part of there are some things we expose here against certain metrics, and she'll call up some examples, but other deeper ones, we'll actually provide it as, it's included in the service, but from our central group, because we do want to know, it's not just a zip code rate, it's how big you are compared to the other people, because if you're the second largest, well then any of the benchmarking data should be accurate of a user in a talent pool. If you're the 15th, it's not. You're not going to get rates that the major players there who do 6 times the business are going to get. But knowing that helps you make that assessment properly, and that's what we help you with. But we do have that visibility to a zip code, local code, and then an ONET code basis.
I have another question. It's regarding your supplier base. Because you're being an American company coming into Europe, probably you are very heavy in the USA, but what about in the Nordic region or the Mediterranean region? Have you also suppliers already hooked up to your network?
There are about 35–40% of our business is outside the U.S.
Yeah.
Now that's
How many in Europe?
I have to get that data. How many suppliers do we have? Do a European supplier base?
I don't know, but I'm sure
Why not?
there's.
I mean, I would say at that point we're looking at. I mean, we've been in the UK for almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
So a couple of thousand suppliers, but that doesn't mean if I go into Finland, that I'm gonna get, we have Honeywell in Finland and others that are there, but that's a unique industry, it's not gonna be a different one.
Another question, how easy is it to onboard new suppliers onto the fieldglass application?
It takes minutes to do from a functional perspective.
Yeah.
It takes weeks to do from a when's a customer ready to tell us to onboard them perspective. Because we don't onboard unless there is a contract that you're gonna enact against with them, or that you tell us they're a vendor you wanna start using. So that we would expect them to have an MSA with you for us to load them in the app.
Because you generate the most value by having most of the suppliers already in.
Right, I mean.
So I don't need to onboard all these suppliers.
Well, yes, you still would.
Okay.
Because think about it, so it's a good question. His question was, why don't we go into a market and just onboard all the suppliers in a market? And then whenever you're ready to use them, you can use them. Well, the point is you still have to have an agreement with them to use them. And so we just say, great, instead of setting them up and making them wait, we'll just take the suppliers you're ready to engage with. And that's another area where the Ariba interface may, and the supplier onboarding in the network and all that enablement may just feed us so that you get them in the right place based in the category. Those are the things we'll do to kind of make it seamless. That's what we're looking at there. And again, if we can harmonize the agreements, Ariba's got something like 1.3 million suppliers signed up. We have 17 or 18,000 from just a services perspective. So anything we can take from there because we have a common agreement, that makes life easier for our customers, and that's all we're looking for. Any other questions? So the last piece, if we switch back to the last slide of the other one. There's a survey that we're asking everybody to take. It's in the mobile app. Just shoot to the bottom. And if you could go ahead and break it and go ahead and do it, we appreciate it. Give us feedback on the session. We're happy to answer any additional questions. We have a booth upstairs.
This
that
is
your
not
last
the
vacation?
survey. Yeah, I wish.
There we go.
Here we go.
And we can definitely, so if there's other questions and thoughts, we didn't get through all the things on the deck, but again, we were open for the questions instead. That's kind of how people get their information, I think, a little more effectively. But we'll be around for the rest of the conference. If you have any questions, come on up and see us.